Yeah, we've got the final results from the leadership shuffle. You remember a couple of weeks ago, we covered that Kathleen Taylor. I'm sorry. You what? Okay.
Oh, we have to keep this in the podcast. That's too much fun. Reagan's, is that your son or daughter that just
Yeah,
ran?
that was Oliver. Um,
We're clear to engage. Time on target. 5 mics. Out.
Welcome back to Crosstabs. I'm your co-host, Reagan Knope, with my co-host, Bryan Iverson. Bryan, how are you doing this morning?
I'm wonderful, Reagan. I'm happy to be home. We got the Crooked River Roundup going on this weekend here in Prineville, so I'm excited to hit the rodeo tonight and have some fun. We got a lot of people that come down for this one. Hopefully, no bulls or jumping fences like they were in Sisters. So bring your hard hats if you're coming to the rodeo. I'll give you some tidbits. I was on the Roundup board for 11 years here in Prineville, and Vicky's grandpa was a founding board member back in the 40s. But Sisters Rodeo, they have about a 6 foot rail. And in working cattle like I have, cows can jump 6 feet pretty easily. I've seen them do it. I've been in a pen
Wow.
with them, and they can literally go from nothing to springing over 6 feet. And for a bull, it's not that difficult. In Prineville, we have 8 foot rails, so because they have gone over. So I think there is and there was just that one spot that has the lower 6 foot rail, and that's where that bull went. And it is a fluke thing, but I'm glad everybody made it okay out of that thing. But those going to rodeos is not necessarily a spectator event. It could be a it could be an interactive event, as they say. Hopefully, it doesn't happen again.
Well, that is dangerous, Bryan. I think that you got to be paying attention. Another thing that is dangerous, we've got a journalist here with us, Dirk VanderHart from OPB. And we talked with Dirk before the program, and he informed us that he'll chime in when it makes sense, but he might just be here to listen to some of the rants we do. And we told him that was okay. We're good with that. But we're glad to have Dirk with us here from I don't know, an undisclosed location. Where are you at, Dirk? If
Oh,
you can say.
yeah. Coming to you from my kitchen in Northeast Portland. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, nice.
That's great.
How long have you been in Northeast Portland?
Since 2021, but before that, I was not that far away. I was actually in North Portland. Your listeners might know that Portland actually has 6 quadrants now instead of 4. So we have a north and a south, along with the easts and wests.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've been in Portland since 2009, though.
Oh wow. Okay, that's great.
And where
Well,
were you before that?
For that, I was living in Missouri, Springfield, Missouri. It's the traveling sort of yeah, packing caravan life of a journalist when you're starting out. You go where the jobs are, and now
yeah.
jobs aren't anywhere, so here in Portland.
I was reading that on your bio, and I saw Springfield, and I thought maybe, oh, he's a local guy. He grew up in Eugene, outside of Eugene, and then
No,
read
Springfield,
more.
Missouri.
Wow.
I actually grew up in Michigan. If you guys want to get in the
Okay.
whole bio, I'm from West Michigan,
I
Grand
did. You
Rapids.
went to Michigan State, which, as a Beaver fan, we're not really fans of Michigan State right now, Dirk. I don't know
Yeah,
this. Jonathan Smith kind of like defected. So,
I I get it. I get it. I would be in the same place you are. I'm not even sure if I like the guy yet. So we're gonna have to see.
well, that's interesting. Growing up at Michigan's kind of a battleground state now. It's kind of interesting how politically it's kind of shifted around, and that should be an interesting one to watch this year in the presidential year for sure. Michigan.
Every year. Yeah. I mean, I was used to growing up getting a lot of attention. Every 4 years people would come. That is not the case in Oregon. We don't get that.
Yeah.
Even like the third congressional district where I grew up has been a shift. It used to be pretty solidly Republican, and now it's then it went to Justin Amash. Now it's held by Hillary Skolton, so it's D. But yeah, it's very much in play over there. Interesting politics, more interesting in a lot of ways than Oregon.
I talked to a lot of national guys that used to do what I did on the caucus level, and I've talked to the Michigan guys and Arizona guys, like Nevada, where Trump's in play and Biden's in play. Like we we run completely different campaigns in like Oregon or Washington and California or in Oklahoma or something like that, right? They just don't understand like where a Trump Biden presidential race changes the structure of the down ballot stuff just dramatically, and we don't have that effect really in Oregon because they're not running TV ads and stuff. So it is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it has to have some impact on turnout and everything, but that is, yeah, I'm so used to Oregon politics at this point that I'm not even sure I understand those mechanics. That's interesting.
Yeah, no, me neither. Well, Reagan, you want to start with a couple of news items, and then we'll head into some more stuff.
A couple of weeks ago, we covered that Kate Lieber's taking over the co-chair position after Elizabeth Steiner left in her general election to run for treasurer. And now the Democrats have elected the leader that will replace Kate Lieber, and it is Kathleen Taylor. So the two candidates, and we'll ask Dirk because I believe he tweeted about this too, tried to break this news. But there were two candidates, I think, for leadership, and I think you had previously reported them. So Dirk, maybe why don't you tell us about your reporting on this?
Yeah, these are, these elections, both parties really try to keep kind of a lid on it. These are private caucus discussions, and sometimes it just depends on the lawmaker you talk to as to whether they're willing to talk about what's going on. You probably know that, but we learned that Janine Solomon from Hillsborough and Kathleen Taylor from Southeast Portland were both interested in sort of whipping votes and trying to sell people on their candidacies. And it turned out after the fact, I heard some interesting sort of speculation about why Dems might favor one or the other. And,
do tell.
Seemed well, I think some people looked at Solomon as a more business friendly and moderate candidate, and Kathleen Taylor's the more progressive in some ways, maybe certainly environmentally, I heard. And so there may have been some factionism there, but then obviously, as you both know, in the legislature, there's relationships that and a million other things could come into play as to why a vote might go one way or the other. So I don't think we know the margin yet. I'm not sure even if either of those candidates know the margin. I don't think, as far as I know, neither of them asked for it. But I did see, Reagan, you tweet a kudos and actually your appreciation for Senator Taylor being the Senate leader. So I was interested in that.
Yeah, I just think, I mean, I've worked with her in the legislature. Senator Canopa has worked with her. Haven't worked as much with Senator Solomon, although I think we've gotten along. Not on her key bill from the last session because I'm more of an Apple guy and took more of the Apple position on right to repair. But I disagree. I think with Senator Taylor on plenty of issues, but I've just appreciated how she's approached things and felt like that she had the kind of experience you'd expect. She's been in the Senate, I think, longer than Senator Solomon too, because she was just appointed not that long ago. And so I think that's probably what gave her the edge. And I also just know that Senator Taylor's well respected and a tough negotiator, and I have no reason to believe she isn't good at campaigns either. And so both with Rep. Bowman and with Senator Taylor, it seems like the Democrats have picked qualified leaders, which is, of course, as a Republican who wants to win, annoying because they're more formidable to campaign against and strategize against. But
Dang it.
at the same time, it's nice that they're picking people that have good reputations too. I mean, it's easier to work with leaders that are respected and are willing to build relationships across the aisle, even when they, have to accomplish partisan things in those leadership offices. And I think they probably appreciate when Republicans do the same things. It just makes life a little easier when you're having to work with the other party.
Did you have any substantive problem? I'm not sure if you would share this, but with Lieber in that regard, Reagan, or even Bryan? Or was she seen as a pretty fair dealer?
I didn't. I think that she was extremely fair. And I think that she had a difficult job, as we did, with wrangling two caucuses that can get unruly and want to be difficult. So no, I didn't really have any problems with Lieber on that front.
I really enjoy Senator Lieber. I think she's a straight shooter. I think she'll just tell you what's on her mind. And I think I see that a lot in Senator Taylor too. I think that even talking to some lobby about the pick, I think that was for them. They know that maybe Kathleen Taylor might be a little bit more progressive, but they felt like when you get an answer from her where she is on a bill, like you just know, right? She's not going to change your mind. And I think that conventional wisdom was that Solomon could be a little shaky. So if you walked out of her office and she was a yes on something, and then all of a sudden she's a no on the floor, like that drives lobbyists and everybody crazy, right? Like what? So I think the lobbyists in the world out there in Salem were, as much as it might be a little bit in their world, a little bit more progressive with Taylor, but I think they're happy that they now know who it is and they have to do their job. And I think I like Kathleen, except for she's not a good bowler. I went bowling with her one time with my son, and he was a page on the floor on the house side, and we went bowling one night, and Kathleen shows up, and Vicky asked her to come down, and she and her staffers came down, and we just had a blast, right? We're bowling, and Bonham came by and bowled, and it was the one thing. My son had this whole thing with the Suits, the TV show, the Suits, and they always went bowling, and it was like this thing. And so I think that she's got those relationships, going back to like your original point. Like, I don't know where the vote is either. The caucuses tend to keep the vote totals pretty close to the vest. Usually only two people know. Usually it's the longest standing member of the body manages the vote, and each candidate gets a representative to count the votes. At least I know that's how it works on the Republican side. I think the Democrats do the same thing. We don't have caucus rules, so there is no real rule to how it works, which is always kind of interesting. There's no like written rules. They just kind of make it happen. I think it's all just done from the history of things, but I think that part's kind of interesting. So I think the relationships at the end of the day probably sway people a tad bit more than where's their policy, especially when it's majority minority leader. I think that because these are the people you go to when you need campaign help, you need help on a bill, all the things, right? So I think so that it's really a relationship job.
All right, their next bit of news. Let's do this quick one to get it out of the way. There's a new ballot measure. So there's 3 ballot measures that were referred by the legislature. We've talked about those. We will talk about those when we get closer to the fall. There is one initiative petition right now that is saying they're going to have or already have submitted more than enough signatures. And so as long as their signature verification rate stays, in the 80 to 85%, then they would qualify. And it's IP 17, and it increases or creates a 3% corporate minimum tax on Oregon gross sales above 25 million. And then what it does with that money is it redistributes it. It takes all that tax revenue and distributes it as a check or a credit of some kind. I think it might be a check, $750 to every Oregonian. It might include minors too. I haven't double checked that, but I think it might be every single person. And so they're calling it the Oregon Rebate. The OregonRebate.org is the name of the website. Includes children and all other Oregonians, it says on their website. And to me, Bryan, you can tell me what you think, and Dirk, if you've done any reporting on this, you find interesting. But Bryan, I think the Democrats just have a kicker envy. They're so envious that we get to talk about the kicker all the time. We want to turn the kicker into a check, and so they want their own kicker, but they would never let it come from government revenues they're already using for stuff. So they want to tax the corporations more. And so I'm pretty excited to spend my $750 paying for the increased costs with businesses of more than $750 every year. What about you, Bryan?
Yeah, right. I think I don't know if it's really Democrats behind this one, or it's just,
Could be.
I haven't seen, actual elected officials coming out for it. No doubt, I'm sure they're registered Democrats, but I definitely see a lot of the unions and some of those folks in there. So I'd imagine, on there, I got like the progressive.
Yeah, let's
Party,
clarify this, Bryan. I want to make sure that it's clear. The Progressive Party, the Pacific Green Party, the Working Families Party, which are typically more Democratic aligned, Jobs with Justice, PCUN, the United Auto Workers, the Teamsters, a group called Economic Justice Action Group, Portland Democrats Association, I think, and then Labor's Local 43. So you've got some Democrat and liberal groups, but you're right, no elected
not Republicans.
officials.
I'll say that much. How about that? There's no
Nope.
Republican group there. I think the timing of it's probably, with everything going on with the economy, I think it's going to be a hard one to pass, even if they want to push it on to corporations. I think that it's probably a tough push to, do. I don't know who will rise up against it. Obviously, the Taxpayers Association and some of those groups will probably come out opposing it and push it. I think it'd probably be a pretty easy kill if it actually makes it to the ballot. So I do like, hey, listen, from a campaign perspective, I'll give you my thing on this one real quick is I kind of like ballot measures because they give you, when you're polling within a district, if you can use a ballot measure to ballot test your candidate against some of these measures, sometimes it gives you kind of a good sense of where your district's at, especially larger swath areas. So they are kind of, from just a purely campaign perspective, they are nice to have sometimes to ballot test. Are you voting Republican or Democrat? But I don't think this really goes anywhere. I think there's an idea to have some sort of basic check going to people. Am I glad they're doing 25 million and above? Yeah, sure. I don't know who's really on that list, but now you're talking, there's some local home builders that do, if you do, 20 homes a year, you're above 25 million. So I think that threshold's pretty low. It's kind of like the CAD tax. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully it goes nowhere, but if you said they got enough signatures, we'll find out.
Well, I've not done reporting on this. As I understand it, they don't yet, but they haven't been certified, but it looks very likely. I mean, it brings to mind to me, was it 2016 we had the Measure 97 fight and businesses poured a ton of money into killing that. I think that was a gross sales, gross receipts tax. So, we could see shades of that again. As I understand it, it's some folks from California who have bankrolled the signature gathering here. Do they have the will to put in a ton of money for that kind of fight? And I think, Bryan, I would agree with you. I don't know where voters are right now in terms of passing a tax. It feels like people, with inflation being what it is and a number of other things, feel a little wary.
The Multnomah County, because there was a couple of taxes that didn't pass there, and that's where I'm starting to go, yeah, I think right now, even though it may be corporate and it seems, this corporate enemy, out there in the middle of nowhere, doesn't have a name, right? So people they try to layer it that way, but I think they'd have to spend more money than they'd want to get this passed. And I think you would find some of the grocery stores. I mean, I'd do anything to get the Grocers Association back engaged in the political environment. They seem like they've, since 97, have kind of sat on the sidelines. I mean, they do a little bit here and there, but they really, I mean, man, they were super engaged that cycle, and they've kind of sat back a little bit. Not saying I want this to move forward to get them engaged. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, it would be interesting to see where it falls out.
I think Oregon Business and Industry has said that they are going to get involved too, which probably does mean pretty good corporate opposition to this. And I think it's just a precedent that it sets, just like the payroll tax in Salem, where it was like they don't want this to proliferate. And I mean, you set it at whatever percent it is now. It can always go up. These things very rarely ever go down. They probably don't want this to spread to other states. And it's really just a redistribution of dollars. And it's probably and what's funny about it to me is it's inefficient because you take money from businesses. Businesses are going to have to raise your costs. There's no control over how they would raise their costs and how much. And so you are actually probably finding the most inefficient way to get money back into people's pockets. The most efficient way is to just leave it there before you take it. So this is like the most inefficient way to get the money distributed, and it doesn't even provide, services to people. And so it's kind of interesting, but I agree with your assessment, Bryan.
This go to illegal aliens too?
That's a good question. I think you'd have to be able to file taxes, but if you can file, that's what I don't know is like if they can send in their taxes. Usually you need a social security number for that. So if they don't have a social security number, they probably can't. But
how much do those cost? Say like $3-4 grand when you go over the border, get a social security number.
I did not learn about that, Bryan, when I was in Arizona. We didn't make the right stops, I think, to learn that kind of stuff.
Last real quick thing, let's talk about Senator Dembrow stepping down just
Oh,
before
right.
we
Yeah.
get into the
Yep.
main meat of our stuff. And I think Dirk actually broke this, so maybe broke it on Twitter, which is my favorite thing for Twitter anymore, is just for inside baseball breaking news. It's just kind of great. Like who can get there first? Usually Reagan or Dirk are usually the go to in my mind for stuff.
I mean, sometimes things are a little bit niche. It's not clear that we're going to get a ton of people clicking on a Dembro stepping down link. So it feels like it feels like the kind of thing that's right for a tweet. Yeah, I mean, Dembro had a retirement party last week in Portland, and made it clear to folks that he is going to be stepping down. He has planned to retire at the end of this term, end of the year. So he will apparently, and he confirmed to me via text, be stepping down in September, which in most cases would create this question of like, who wants the seat, who's going to vie for the nomination from the party PCPs, and then move forward. In this case, it's probably a little cleaner because we've just had the primary. We know that State Representative Confam has won the Democratic nomination for this very blue seat, so is all but certain to be the next senator anyway. So and then we also have a primary for her seat that's been decided as well. So, assuming the PCPs for the Democratic Party and the county commissioners in Multnomah, I think just Multnomah, agree, it could be a pretty clean thing where Confam is the senator before next January, and then Willie Chotson, the person who won the primary for her seat, is installed early as well, assuming that's amenable to him.
And I think, Dirk, that's the most likely thing to happen. If you're the Multnomah County Commission, you do not want to be sitting there and going, should we ignore the will of the voters or shouldn't we? You should just do what the voters have already executed in that point, right? There's really no good reason to do it, even if you have ideological differences. Like if I was on that, if you were a Republican that had to vote on that, you would just accept the will of the voters at that point. There seems no reason to do anything different. It would actually be a story if they tried to not. Now they have to appoint a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 5 to send to the commission to replace, and then the commission gets to pick from those. So it may be notable which names they put on that list, but they shouldn't be picking somebody the voters haven't picked it after we've just had a primary.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it should be straightforward, but I try never to assume in politics.
Who do we have any Republicans, Reagan? Do you know? And I'll have to take a look and see. Is that where I wonder if is that where we had like the 4 vote uh difference between what's his face?
Oh, yes. Brian Knott's in that commission race. He wouldn't have been seated in time, though, if he had won that for some reason. But I think the commission's all Democrats in Multnomah County. And then they have to pick all Democrats to move forward. So
Yeah.
there's really.
Oh, that's good. I guess at this point, if you're Denbro, you might as well just leave, right? I mean, if you've got stuff you want to do and you're taking off, I mean, I don't think anybody really likes not having, a representative there, right? And somebody that just basically vacates and, keeps a paycheck for 6 months. That's kind of no fun either, I think. So I think the idea of stepping down, saying, hey, I can't answer your emails anymore because you're a constituent and you got an employment department issue or something like that. It's smart of him to step down and move out of the way if he's got other things he's going to go do, because it's probably not fair to his constituents to do it.
The biggest shakeup that this will actually cause, Brian, is Denbrough holds the education chair gavel. And so the real question will be who picks up that gavel. You've got Frederick and Gelser Bloom as the other 2 Democrats on the committee. And but what's funny about that too is that Denbrough has been more known. I mean, he's known for education when you're there in the legislature, but he's actually more known to me as like someone who works on environmental issues. And so I think will, Confam continue to focus on the environmental issues? Is she going to pick up different issues? Is she going to be as easy to negotiate with Denbrough? I mean, I think a lot of people, especially on the business side of the aisle, go, ooh, we may actually miss Denbrough after this transition. We'll see. He's a little bit more old school style, and a little bit more willing to work with people. And I don't know. I don't think Confam has the same reputation, but maybe she grows into it. I don't know.
I think our side's a little concerned about what a Senator fam is going to look like. I think we're a little more concerned about that. We'll see. Identity politics seem to be kind of a thing with her, so we'll find out. We'll find out. Well, the last thing we wanted to touch on real quick is speaking of only having 6 months left in office, Representative Conrad, decided to not be a Republican anymore after he lost his Republican primary. And I thought, and he just said, well, I'm just going to become an independent. And then he went on a diatribe with Julia Shumway, as what it looks like to me. She probably couldn't write fast enough with the quotes, but basically a diatribe against Republicans, and left the party. So now he's an independent for his last 6 months in office, where he'll probably never take a vote again. I don't see any sort of special session on the docket coming up. And the question here is, I heard that Republicans are given the ability to move committee assignments around. I wonder if we'll see that here at all.
Ooh, that's Bryan, you're breaking some news there. I didn't see that reported.
It
That
wasn't
is
reported, but I heard that. So I'm like, that we're breaking news, Reagan.
Well, that's one of the most important things when you're running a podcast is to break some news. And Dirk, you're welcome to pop in whenever you get a point. And I don't know if you reported on this story, if it was just Julia, but I kind of want to just read some portions of this, and then I have some thoughts, and I'm sure Bryan, you have some thoughts, because I want to let his side be here, but I just think that there's a lot of stuff in here that really sounds good when you read it, and then you just take a minute to think about it, and you go, oh, okay, maybe that doesn't really make some sense. So, Conrad says, I'm not going to fight for Trump. I'm not going to fight to adhere to that party as I see it. I don't represent the party, but I still represent it, my district. It's most important that I represent the district. For me, it's always been people come first, then policies, then party politics are third. I just in Oregon, I think this may be different in other states, more competitive states, swing states, red states. Sure, there's a Trump element of the party and people who are really excited about him here, but in the legislature, I do not recall seeing a lot of calls for Republicans to fight for Trump. And the issues that he was sort of primaried over, the abortion and trans bill, not Trump issues. Those were pre-existing issues before Trump, especially the abortion issue has been around way before Trump. The trans issue sort of came more on the scene as Democrats were sort of like pushing that forward as a thing they wanted to enshrine protections for. But it hasn't been, I don't look at that issue as a Trump issue. He avoided the bathroom issue in North Carolina. Like he doesn't really like to hit on these particular issues very much, honestly. So if he's equating those two things, I think he's making a false equivalency there. He also said he's not going to give up on politics. In 2026, voters in his district will choose a new Lane County commissioner, a state representative, and a state senator. Now he's, of course, the representative. Cedric Hayden, the current state senator, is barred from running for re-election. Conrad said he's considering those offices. So he's considering running for Lane County commissioner. He's considering running for his old seat again, apparently. Will he run as a Republican? I'm not sure. Independent. Nobody has really gotten to the legislature as an independent in over 100 years. I used to keep track of like how many independents and R's and Democrats. I'll go back to my data file, but most of these people get in office and then change their party. They don't get elected as an independent party. So, Bryan, what do you think about him taking another crack at running for office in 2026?
Listen, here's my prediction. Charlie Conrad will never hold another public office again. There's my prediction. No way he wins a state Senate seat. That's Jamie Cate's seat if she wants it. When he's done, you might get some other people running, but Jamie Cate by far and away is ahead of that game. Well, maybe Harvick might want to step in and use his newfound, winning here, but he not only lost, he got destroyed in a primary. I mean, I think it's just nuts. I mean, he got 1,800 votes and Harvick got out of 8,000. I mean, that's just not good. So I don't think it has nothing to do with, I think, even the votes he took on this one. I think it's just the simple fact that he's just kind of not a likable guy. If you get 1,800 votes like that, that's just horrible. So I would just say he's done in general. And that's just the end of Charlie Conrad as we see it here in 6 months. And I didn't dislike him on any level. I thought he was a good caucus member, for the most part. And this was a really bad vote that he took, and he took it twice. So he clearly took it knowing what the outcome would be. But I think he, in his ego, thought that, he was above all of that. And if you go back to his first primary, he won that primary by like 100 votes. So it's not like he had a mandate coming out of his original primary. Heck, he probably got the same votes. I might have to go back and look and see how many votes he got in his primary the first time and what he got this time. So, oh well for Charlie Conrad. Like I said on previous podcasts, he will be known as the former representative.
Can I ask you a question, Bryan, that has
Yeah.
fascinated me? Because you said, he got crushed, and I think that's true. And you tied it to his likability. I mean, part of it for me looking at it was that he didn't have institutional support from his party and from his caucus. And that was really striking. I don't know if that set a precedent or not, but, I know there are caucuses that will defend their incumbents regardless. And that, the House Republicans decided in this case that they couldn't do that. And I wonder what your insight is into,
Yeah.
was that an easy decision? I mean, it just feels out of step with what I typically see.
But he had a few people come out and, and endorse him. I think like Cyrus Javity endorsed him and a few folks. The reason why I think this was different is, and I can say this because Charlie's put it out there. When he made this vote, Vicky at the time was a House Republican leader and was very clear to Charlie that if you make this vote, I won't and can't save you in a primary. And so he was clear that that's what, that he knew that was going to be the case. Now, I think what the difference might have been is we also had another primary in the House Republican caucus where Christine Drazan came back and, took out James Heap. So, to your point, I agree. It's definitely unprecedented that you allow two Republican incumbents, really, that I don't think. I mean, he's probably even more interesting than Conrad, to be honest, because he never had a bad vote that I can think of. That one I think is kind of interesting. So with that being said, it is odd that everybody was mute on both of those primaries. I do find that pretty odd. There was a few Republicans, like you said, that there were, we talked about that came out for Charlie. I don't know if anybody came out for Hebe, but I think that Charlie had a couple. I think the Drazan shopped around a poll that just showed her destroying everybody. So I think that's really why the caucus just stayed off of that, because they kind of, and then also I think we saw a Harvick poll, that they were shopping around too, that had Harvick, basically beating him with what he did. So I think once people saw those polls, like, how things work in Salem, like once they see the tide go in one direction, everybody's like, I'm not getting on that ship. And they hopped off. So that is an interesting thing, because you're right. The Democrat caucuses, I can't think of a time when they just let somebody get abandoned over I don't know, being a gun rights advocate or something. I'm just trying to think of what it was.
I mean, the only similar, and it's not similar, is last election when Brad Witt tried to jump to a Salem seat because he couldn't win his seat in Clatskanie again. But that was, he wasn't the incumbent for that district. So it wasn't a 1-to-1.
Yeah, we would say that I think now Governor Kotek, in effect, got rid of his seat. But she just did it through a different way versus taking him out in a primary. But yeah, I think there was definitely people piling up against him. But he had some institutionals, because there wasn't Brian Clem behind his campaign, I think, when he was running again.
Yeah, but not Future PAC.
Not the caucus on any level, but he had some institutional support. But you're right, that's probably the only one I can think of, Democrat wise, where they just kind of let it go. So it'll be interesting to see what he does. I think it's not good for our caucus to have, two members get kind of beat basically in a primary. That's definitely not a good look, I don't think, for us. But with those two, and I think you got to take them on their merits of each of them. Like I've talked about it. I don't blame Drazan for wanting to get back in the legislature. Relevancy is kind of important to the political structure. And so you got to have a title to have a voice. And And then with Conrad, it was really a voting thing. They just kind of both happened at the same time. So I don't know if you have any more thoughts on it, Reagan. You're the right to life guy. So
Well,
otherwise,
he says here he sees his support for abortion rights and the ability of trans people to get gender affirming care as consistent with minimal taxes, small government, respecting people's personal liberties. I mean, this is always the ongoing debate, but the Constitution, but the Declaration of Independence says you have a right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Well, if your life never starts, you didn't have a right to any of those things, the other two, right? And so I've always thought of life as sort of a more core Republican position, and it clearly is based on some of these results. I think really the only debate in the party is the strategy about how to govern on those rights and how much you restrict abortion and in what instances you restrict it, right? On the Republican side, not really a debate. And then, sort of disrespecting. I mean, honestly, I look at, and I think a lot of other Republicans look at the trans issue as sort of disrespecting nature, which mostly, it creates male and female human beings. And so it's sort of interesting to see him try to turn those into conservative or Republican style values. I also think he said one of the things that the Republican Party for so long has always focused on is trying to find somebody to hate. You can go back to McCarthy and McCarthyism, looking at the communists, and then you go forward in time. It's communism, then it's hippies. Immigrants are always part of the equation. When you get to the 90s, it's homosexuals. You can always throw in Muslims. It's just kind of rinse and repeat. And I think that's interesting. It's certainly a way to assess things. I'm very surprised that Conrad seems to be more on the pro-communist side of things. That's an interesting take to have. And the Democratic Party, I mean, he's sort of not going there either, I guess, because they're busy hating the Jews and all that. Hating business owners and hating people who just want to have, girls in girl sports. I mean, I guess, there's always a lot of ways to look at things, and his perspective is unique, and I also think shared by a very small number of people, and that's why he only got 19% of the vote.
well said, Reagan. I hope this is the last time we get to talk about Representative Charlie Conrad, to be honest with you. I'm going to transition into a story that Dirk just reported on because I thought it was pretty interesting, and it was one because I lost my bet with Reagan on the CD3 race because I had Jayapal winning the CD3 race and Reagan had Dexter winning. And I'm kind of pissed, at the APAC for coming in and spending 1.3 million because I think I might have won. I don't know, or 2.3 million. Dirk, why don't you, it's your story. Why don't you set us up on this one? Because I think it's a very interesting move.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of a microcosm of something that's playing out in Democratic congressional primaries around the country, which is APAC, the what is it? The American Israel Public Affairs Committee, I think. The biggest pro-Israel sort of lobby group in the country has really been putting its thumb on the scale in some of these primaries. And CD3, which was the race to replace retiring Congressman Earl Blumenauer, was certainly one of those, but we didn't really know that for sure until yesterday when the most recent committee filings for May came out. And what they showed was that APAC has a super PAC called UDP, United Democracy Project, that put $2.3 million, as you said, Bryan, into two different super PACs that weighed in on the race. It put it put $1.3 million into this kind of mystery group that launched all these attack ads on one of the candidates, Sushila Jayapal. I think that was your candidate, Bryan. And then it poured another $1 million into 314 Action Fund, which was busy funding all these positive ads about Maxine Dexter. And, that's $2.3 million. Actually, the total outside spending against Jayapal and for Dexter was like $5.5 million. I mean, that's big money for an Oregon congressional race. I think, all the main candidates were certainly viable in their own way. Jayapal and Dexter were viable. But this, to the consultants involved in the race, this spending really told the tale, right? And it all has to, I mean, it gets back to Gaza and the war between Israel and Hamas, and the fact that, at least in a lot of the political consultants' minds I've talked to, and I don't think this is too far of a stretch, APAC really doesn't want another Jayapal in Congress, because the one that's there right now is Pramila Jayapal, who is the younger sister of the candidate and who is a pretty fierce critic of Israel. And what AIPAC and some of its allies seem to be doing this year is, as they look at the Democratic landscape, trying to put their money on the candidate they think will be more friendly to the cause. And that, for whatever reason, that's the calculation they made in CD3, it looks like.
Well, and Bryan, I'm looking at their website and they have a 2024 endorsed primary winners. They have won 100% of the primaries where they've had an endorsed candidate on the ballot. I mean, it's sort of interesting because what you're shaking your head, Dirk. Tell me.
So there's one where they got rebuffed in Southern California. I'm not sure if
Maybe they haven't updated.
There may be just a difference between we endorse versus like we're going to pour a bunch of money in and kind of launder it around, so you're not really sure where it's coming from or whatever. I don't know, but there was one in Southern California that they did not get their candidate.
That's how, Reagan, that's how I keep my winning record so high, is I say, well, I didn't really work on that race when you lose it. I think these guys, they do the same with their math. They're like, well, we didn't really endorse. We just threw, $3 million at that one. And, but if we full on endorsed, but then we won. But the money is to your point, Dirk, that you talked about. I mean, that was an intense, and it wasn't like a little bit of money or a lot of money over a course of time. It was concentrated. I mean, you every probably 20 minutes you were seeing 4 ads, 2 pounding Jayapal and 2 propping up Dexter, and it was just intense over that course of time there. And that shows you that money in politics sure is the mother's milk, because it was insane, and it just moved that needle. I mean, like, whoa, which was pretty crazy to see. And I think you're right. The other Jayapal is part of the terrorist caucus, and I think that they just didn't want that anymore.
Just to be clear, I didn't call her part of the terrorist caucus.
Sorry, I did. I call her part of the terrorist caucus, or AOC, the squad, or whatever she's part of. There's no doubt about that. That Jayapal's been very anti-Israel, and I don't think that the calculus was probably super strong that her older sister would be any different. So I think that was probably a calculus they're correct on. And I like Maxine Dexter. I think she was a good representative, and I hope she'll be a good congressperson, there, because I think we said this on the podcast. I looked it up. There's been 3 congressmen in over 70 years in that district. So when you lock in CD3, you can be there for a long time.
Well, and one of them was Ron Wyden, who's still around. Yeah. So,
Yeah, right. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, you're in Congress for like 50 years in Wyden's case, or however long he's been in Congress, because he's 77 now. So he was one of the youngest congressmen. I was in middle school at Gresham High School, where I grew up at Gresham, and Ron Wyden was a young congressman coming to our middle school in the 80s talking about democracy. And I remember that, and I'm like, wow, and he's still a senator. So it's a long time you can be there.
Bryan, I think the one thing that's worth pointing out too with the AIPAC is that they're making a couple of strategic calculations that are political, and that you can kind of talk us through. But I've noticed 2 things that they're doing. One, when the candidates were interviewed on Think Out Loud in the CD3 primary, none of them actually expressed a position on Israel that was different than the others. We talked about this. We talked about how there was really no difference. AIPAC was just sort of telegraphing or assuming that Jayapal's going to be worse than the other candidates, and that Dexter might be more pro-Israel. But there wasn't a lot of public evidence for that necessarily that I saw. The other thing is they did not run these ads on Israel issues. They ran them on other issues. They attacked Jayapal on her record. They praised Dexter for being a doctor and working on housing, right? I think, walk us through what would, if you were a big group and you had a lot of money to spend, why you might make those 2 decisions as opposed to sticking with Israel and just spending the money yourself instead of through other groups.
Well, I think on the Democrat side, or at least especially this AIPAC in specific, I'm sure they polled it, right? And they probably knew that this attack on Jayapal was probably a little harder hitting than the other ones. Because I think that the Democrats are probably split pretty, I don't know, evenly, not evenly. I'm sure they know where people are at on the Israeli war with Hamas. So the calculus probably is they're not going to be able to move the needle enough to come in And also, if you're the Jewish group coming in and you're attacking her on your Jewish war, it just kind of seems disingenuous because obviously they're going to be pro-Israel, right? So you could almost, if you're Jayapal, you can almost counter that negative attack against her. So I think the calculus is to go maybe after something a little bit different. So you're not hitting what you think you're going to hit, and then it was probably something that wasn't brought up either about her votes on the Multnomah County Commission. So I think that was kind of a fresh hit too.
I mean, I would say too, Reagan, that like I said, this is happening around the country. There was a story in the New York Times yesterday about AIPAC going after Jamal Bowman in New York, $14.5 million in spending. And they're not talking about, they're barely talking about Gaza there either, because I think there is, that's not going to be a slam dunk with the Democratic primary electorate, but they're attacking Bowman because he's not sufficiently loyal to Joe Biden, right? Like there are more potent messages that they have found in the districts that they are playing in. And I just think that is sort of been the rule where they're doing this stuff.
That's right. Bowman is not sufficiently loyal to Biden. You hear that, Ben? Oh, sorry, wrong Bowman. Dirk, my other question for you has a lot. This is just totally off the top of my head, but it's something that always sticks in my craw a little bit, is how the press reports on political giving and the spending. Okay, because a lot was made out of the strategy on their spending. And I think your tweet or your story specifically called out that they started spending the money in a timeline where they wouldn't have to release that they were involved until basically today. It was like a month or more that they're protected from that. All of those are, and Phil Knight, there's a story every time Phil Knight gives a check. And a lot of times journalists will use quietly gave. And my question is always, what is he supposed to do when he does it gives a check? What are donors supposed to do? And why is it that the money gets covered in that particular way when most of the time he cuts a check, it gets reported legally, people are reporting on the check, which is fine, but that the color around the political giving is always so strange to me. And if you can take us into that world, I would like to understand it a little.
Let me just say that I have seen you take issue with this, and you have not taken issue with my verbiage around this, as far as I know. But
maybe you're better at it. Yeah.
But I would first say, to the FEC federal stuff, don't you think that's notable that they would have? I mean, they seem to be purposely disguising the fact that they're playing a role in the race by gaming the timelines. I think that anytime someone is spending $2.3 million to influence voters, but trying to hide the fact that they're influencing voters, which seems to be the case, and I can't say for sure with this federal spending, that's notable. Wouldn't you want to know who's sort of pulling the strings? But with Knight, I mean, we have a different system here in Oregon for state campaign spending. He has to report that within a month until it's election time, and then it's a week. I don't know. I mean, I think that what you're talking about is there was a headline that was while Oregon lawmakers debated campaign finance regulations, Phil Knight quietly gave $2 million. Look, I'm not gonna defend or attack that verbiage. I understand why maybe it was made, but you're right. It's not like he's gonna put out a press release that he's giving $2 million or whatever it was to bring balance to Salem. I think that his involvement is very interesting. He's the richest guy in the state. He's doing. I mean, that is money that you all and your side of the aisle can really use and put to good use. I mean, it could be game changing in a really close year. So I think it's very valid to cover. I don't know about the adverb that you're taking issue with in this specific instance.
Bryan, I'll in a second, but one other thing too is the story is Phil Knight gives $1 million or $2 million or whatever his check is, right? And you're right. I mean, my issue usually is whenever journalists use an adjective, it frustrates me because adjectives are describing words, and unless the thing is obviously that, quietly doesn't make sense to me. But I think the other thing too is the story is never, or doesn't seem to be, at least in Oregon, a Republican PAC is sitting on $5 million and is going to use it to destroy Democrats, which I always think is also interesting. It's always coverage of the donors, not the fact that Republicans have succeeded in raising a bunch of money too. That's the other thing I think is interesting in terms of the framing. Oh, sure.
I've been trying to get Greg Walden on the phone for years now about this PAC and to walk me through the strategies, what he's doing. I can show you probably 10 to 12 emails where I've been asking for this and they just keep stonewalling me. So if you all know him better than I do, if you can foster this connection, I'm happy to write the story.
I think, well, one, I know that Greg has one goal, and that's elect more Republicans to the legislature. That's the Bring Balance to Salem PAC's mission. I can tell you that. And I think that I think guys like Phil Knight and others give money because they know that balance is usually good for business. And I think that's usually that's the whole impetus behind Bring Balance to Salem, is that idea that balance usually means we get better bills, right? We get less taxes, we get more business friendly environment. We usually get stuff, the both sides of the aisle, like the bad stuff's kind of pulled out and you kind of get more of this middle ground scenario. I think you get like a Measure 110 fix out of it. When you have more balance, you get better things. We push the Democrats into uncomfortable conversations, and they push us into uncomfortable conversations. And I think that's where you can find good bills and good balance over time. And I think that's what the whole goal was when he started it. Now, the money thing, I find this is where, especially on the federal side, I think journalists, I was going to call you a journal, but I'll let it go because you say journalist, because you, you have, money's fun, right? Money is sensational. It's interesting. It's, when you're talking in the millions of dollars, most people don't have it. So when you say, wow, they gave $1 million or $2 million was spent, it's sexy, right? It's a good headline. So I get why you do it. The APAC stuff on the federal side, this is why I think our rules are just silly on campaign finance, because they reported it as the rules are required. They did the disclaimer on the TV ad as the rules are required. And yet they still get, it's still weird. It's still thought of as dark money, this idea that it's dark money. And I think that that's why Oregon's system, I think, was always better, is because ours is just, you got a flashlight on it, you get to go see it, and you have these reporting requirements. And the federal side of stuff, I just think the super PAC stuff, all the things that we hate about the federal side of things, was like, oh, the people of blah, blah, blah are responsible for the contents of this ad. And you have no idea who those people are. You have to dig deep to find those people. And sadly, the campaign finance law that we passed is probably going to look more like that the next 5 years. So I'm actually bummed to see where our campaign finance laws are going. I think it's easy to report on what Phil Knight gave $1 million to Bring Balance to Salem PAC. It's right there. It's in black and white. And we're going to see now, all of a sudden, that money might go to, under the new laws, it'll go to this one big, huge super PAC in Michigan. And then that will go down to a super PAC out of Oklahoma. We'll circle back around to a PAC to Maryland, and then split between 12 different PACs running campaign ads in Oregon. And we'll never know that Phil Knight gave $1 million.
There's a million ways to game it. Yeah, I don't know how it's going to work, but you're right. I mean, when this kicks in, what is it, 26, 27, we are going to see a lot more independent expenditures than we already do. It's going to get a little harder, more confusing to track, at least at first. But, the public really, all signs were that they were craving reining in money in politics. It's just not possible to do that fully.
And
I think those are, I think also the group that has brought these forward is sort of bringing loaded questions. I mean, everyone says that people love campaign finance reform, but when you're asking them, they're asking very obvious questions, just like, do you think it should be legal to limit money in politics? And people go, well, sure, we should limit money in politics. But this is one of those things where the details really matter. And they were being, the legislature was forced to pass campaign finance reform because someone was collecting signatures and saying, well, we should have campaign finance limits. And without explaining to people the logistics of running campaigns, which no one should ever need to know or care about unless they really want to, like, nobody knows that was going to, if I walked up to you and were like, would you like to sign this bill? It's going to bankrupt all of the candidates in Oregon and force big money to spend outside ads and not let candidates control their own message. No one's going to sign that. But because limits in politics, it's so much harder to explain why the limits are bad and why the best system is just as much or more transparency as you can get in unlimited contributions, because the thing that we're going to lose in Oregon is candidates are going to lose control. Right now, the candidates and the caucuses have the most control. When there's outside groups and you're not allowed to coordinate or at least control what they say, you're going to lose control of your message, and it's going to be to the detriment of candidates in the political system. I've always thought and preferred when candidates drop their own hits on their opponents, because that means you actually stand behind what you're saying. You're not letting some group say something about you or your opponent. You're just saying it yourself. You're saying my opponent sucks and here's why, and I'm great and here's why. I prefer that, and I think voters respect that more. And what the lost story on campaign finance reform is, candidates are going to lose control of their message, and they're not going to be able to do that. And at the end of the day, right now we have a system where, Jeff Golden can say he's not supported by big money, and it can be true technically, even though the Democratic caucus is going to weigh in for him. Now everyone's going to be in that position, and it's really not going to benefit anybody, honestly, I think.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean, everyone already is in that position. They just don't. It just doesn't need to come to play because we have no limits. I think
Right.
I hear some pretty sharp criticisms of the citizen-generated initiative process by Reagan over here.
I wouldn't say. I would say I've observed that Washington has an interesting play on the system where they send stuff to the legislature, and then if the legislature doesn't approve it, it can go through. I don't know if they're allowed to amend it. I don't think they are, but we in Oregon have I think it's a less clear system, and it does create some problems. I'm not going to say it's a bad system necessarily, but I think it does create a lot of unintended consequences of the legislation. And so an unpopular opinion is that we overturn the will of the voters when we adjust these ballot measures. But I think the real truth of it is, one group with an agenda can run some of the worst stuff you've ever seen, and it doesn't go through any kind of process to be vetted except for the campaign. And the campaign isn't always the best way to do that. So, I mean, I think, yes, I guess I am criticizing the initiative process a little bit. So
it
I don't
just
know if
sounds
there's a
like
way to
criticism
fix
to
that.
me. I don't know.
I don't know if there's a way to fix it is the problem, but it certainly is a flaw in the system for ballot measures.
Unintended consequences, right? I mean, I think that's really, but we had two.
Mhm.
We had this one, and we also had the Measure 110 fix that was kind of hovering out there. And it's two of the things that the legislature really took up and fixed in the short session, because you had these things hanging out there. I'm
Yeah.
afraid of it being used as a political tool weapon in the future to kind of force legislation or to deal with certain things. I think that's probably an oddity for us out there. But at the end of the day, I probably agree with it. I like the fact of walking by people at the post office trying to get my signature for something. I think that's kind of cool. I don't know. I think it's kind of neat to have them talk about whatever it was, right? Measure 114 or whatever thing they're out there pushing at the time. I'm okay with it. I think sometimes we have the authority at the legislature to fix some things that go wrong when you have a measure is passed, as long as a constitutional measure that changes things a little bit. But I think it's good. Hey, Dirk, on story ideas, I really wanted to ask you this one because I really wanted to see like on the lead, like you got to get like emails from people like just crazy ideas or story ideas. Or I heard, I don't know, like when the Lamoda stuff was breaking back in the day, with Willamette Week, and those guys, and I'm sure they were fed some of that stuff early on, and then they start looking. When do you like take an idea or an email from somebody that says, I don't know, maybe you probably have an idea of like a story that you had to go down some rabbit holes and you found, like, what is it like? Is there a cool story that you can think of that was like that? Or how do you handle leads when they come in if something seems so sensationalist or something crazy, like, I don't know, nepotism in the Capitol or something? Do you choose to go down or not go down?
Yeah, I mean, this is like a totally imperfect science. I hesitate to call it an art. I mean, so let's just like set the baseline, right? Like the reason I do this, I think the reason everyone I know that is a reporter in journalism does this is a couple reasons. One is there's a belief that, an informed electorate is a good thing, rather than people who are either completely unengaged and uninformed or are being told things that are misleading. And the other thing is just like, well, I guess I should say part of that is being an advocate in some ways for the public, so that like I'm in that building, I'm in Salem trying to actually figure out what is going on versus potentially what the people you guys are working for are telling us is going on. There's a sanitized sort of choreographed version, I think, often of the Capitol that is like the thing everyone wants you to see. And then there's a trillion conversations and little fights and negotiations and all the stuff of lawmaking. So I think part of our job is to find out what's actually happening and sort of relay that. But there's way too much for me to do, right? As one person or even as a news organization. So I think part of it is just when I get a tip like that, figuring out where it lands and all that. Like, a tip that Michael Dembro is resigning from the legislature. One, that's an easy one to run down because Dembro is upfront about it. But two, it's probably not a big story in the grand scheme of like OPB. Yeah. But like another one, like campaign finance, since we were just talking about it. I got a text during the session this last time that said, "Hey, just so you know, like campaign finance is going to happen this session." First I had heard about it. It was really early. Obviously it's a short session, so early is relevant, and I was like, I didn't believe it. I couldn't envision some actual movement on this really thorny issue happening. But that was one where, it came from a place that I thought was, credible. And it was not that hard to sort of make 5 or 6 calls or texts, have some conversations based on what I knew and track down. And the next day, I think we had a story about like some really interesting negotiations between business groups and labor unions who don't typically get around the table and negotiate issues. And that led to the campaign finance package we just talked about. So I don't know, Bryan. I mean, I don't have like I frankly, for myself, I wish I had a rubric like where I could be like, all right, here's my tool and this tip fits here. And what if this, then that, right? Like it's just not that simple. It has to do with whether the story is important and interesting, whether it seems credible, whether or not that's something I could even confirm without like going to the depths of hell and back, right? Because my time is finite. And just those things. I don't know. I don't know how else to say it.
Is it different at OPB than when you were at Portland Mercury? I mean, I know that there's definitely I'm just curious, like amongst media, or like, is it, I mean, those are, of course you did some stuff before the Mercury, but because Portland Mercury, obviously we would consider it to be a far left leaning newspaper. And then OPB, we would consider it, you guys probably consider yourselves to be neutral. We consider you guys to be kind of like center left. Probably because of all the nuances that Reagan talks about with your editorialism of headlines. But I'm just
government-funded journalism.
But regardless of that, that's just me just trying to be sensational myself. But I think within the organizations, do you find, like, I don't know.
I think I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think I know what you're saying. I mean, I look, I wouldn't disagree that the Mercury tends to lean left. I would say that you can look at most of my reporting there, and I think it was very even-handed. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a difference between a Portland Mercury story and an OPB story. We're a statewide news outlet. Sometimes our reach is bigger, but really ensuring that something is in the public interest and not just sort of salacious for salacious sake, or just kind of a little dig that is going to get a lot of clicks. I mean, there's a story I've been sitting on that I think would really get a lot of like action, and probably people would talk about it a lot, that I can't bring myself to write just yet because I'm not sure it's like all caps public interest story. And I think that is more what we shoot for with OPB.
What info do you need us to run down so you can publish the story?
Reagan, hold on. Let me hit pause on the podcast real quick.
No, but but that it does come into play for sure. We are trying not to be overly chatty or gossipy. I frankly tell sources all the time that I'm calling them to gossip because part of my job is figuring out what is actually going on and what people are saying. But the vast majority of that will not make it onto OPB's airwaves or onto our website or in our coverage.
It definitely tends to be our conversations are a little bit more chatty about what's happening around a specific issue or something. I just find it fascinating when the way you see journalists and how they approach, like TV journalists, like all they want is an 8-second clip, right? That they can air in a 92-second package or whatever they're pulling together. And then OPB seems to be shorter with their stuff that they're doing. Like even your guys' podcasts seem to be super short. The one you guys do on Friday, which I love, but it's like 18 minutes. You like come in, you hot, and you're out hot. It's I don't know.
Yeah.
Is that just a business decision, or is that?
The podcast, we are trying to sort of examine an issue and not really just chat about it kind of like we are now. By the way, I this is getting long, so I hope that your listeners will bear with us. I'm enjoying myself, but I think we are trying to sort of boil down an issue and let people understand it pretty quickly. I often think we could probably go a little longer, but it's not. I mean, it's just there's no like hard pressures either way. That's just the way we often do it. I would say though that like OPB is also we've got a lot of people that have a writing background and aren't just radio. Radio tends to be pretty short form in a lot of cases, but you can write as long as you want on the website. And I often probably write way too long because I geek out over a lot of legislative stuff. So
Yeah, that's
I don't
fine.
know. I mean, radio though, radio is its own medium, just like TV. They don't have the ability to go deep on a lot of issues given that medium.
Well, how about then speaking of how long we are, let's talk about campaigns this next cycle. So as we move forward, let's put our past behind us and let's like start thinking about what we're looking at for the future, because we're just talking about how people get you news stories. And we'll tell people how to contact Dirk directly. The best place to catch him is on X or Twitter. I still can't call it X. I don't know, but
I can't either.
Fun to hit him up on Twitter and follow him on there. But what's kind of what do you think? I mean, we kind of seems like the basic stuff, the themes of this political cycle, like it's economy, it's jobs, it's housing prices, it's affordability, traffic concerns. I mean, last election cycle it turned into what we thought we saw with crime and drugs and people. I mean, I think we still have those, but doesn't feel like it's in the forefront of their mind. So I'm just curious what your thought is on what is there a theme emerging, or are we still waiting
for this election?
Yeah,
I noticed you didn't say reproductive rights, which your opponents will be hammering, I believe, pretty strongly.
Yeah, thanks.
If Planned Parenthood is still around.
Yeah, right.
So I'm not a pollster. Like you guys should probably have John Horvick on at some point, because he does a really good job of taking the temperature of folks. But I do think that people are still. It feels like they're still really concerned about a lot of the same things as in 22, right? Like, I mean, people in Portland are seeing some improvements, I think, in some of the disorder on the streets. I know you guys love to rag on Portland on this podcast and talk about how, it's chaos and flaming cars and everything, but
it's our abortion.
But yeah, and it has been for a while. But I do think that those things are really still going to be salient. I know that Will Lathrop, your guys' candidate in the AG race, will be talking about it a lot. And I think that probably a lot of the points he makes will still, resonate with a lot of voters, whether or not that is the end all be all, or, the fact that Oregonians have really high bills, tax bills, or bills for whatever, for power companies and all that. I mean, I think that's on a lot of people's mind. I don't know. I haven't done the door knocking or the polling. I don't know that it feels that different of an election in terms of the issues as 22 does. But it sounds like you think, I don't know, you think that there's some play in what the main.
I do. I think, I think turnout's going to really matter, especially in our legislative races. And then, some of those local nonpartisan stuff, I don't know if it'll matter as much. Those probably usually local issues. But I think in our legislative races and the statewide race for sure, that turnout's going to matter. So I'm always curious to see in presidential years. I don't know, the enthusiasm gap seems to be literally from wanting to vote at all to down. I think the, what do they call it? The double haters is what they're calling the people that hate both Trump and Biden. That's probably at an all-time high, or at least that it's been tracked, that people just aren't excited to vote for either President Trump or President Biden. It is an oddity. I mean, I can't remember the last time. Reagan, you're the historian. When's the last? Have we ever had a former president running against the current president that beat him?
Oh goodness.
That'd be a tough one to look
usually,
Not
Usually
in
they
my
don't run
lifetime, I
again.
would say.
Probably
Yeah,
like Taft would be the last time, or there was one that ran for and
Roosevelt,
won
maybe.
non-consecutive terms. So I'll
Roosevelt,
look it
Bull
up real
Moose
quick.
Party, maybe, right? That's what all I could think of was like maybe Roosevelt. But I just think so. I think you're right. The salient issues underneath the presidential stuff, I think, is really going to be, the Vasquez race in Portland, I think was very telling to where some people in Portland are at with the crime and that sort of stuff. Um, Outside of that, there wasn't a whole bunch of telling things. I think we're seeing a lot of more national issues. I feel like, the border and those sort of things are kind of creeping into where we even saw Democrats do a press release on Biden's border policy. Ricky Ruiz and some other ones did a press conference on it. So, we're as we try to goat them and make them weigh in on the issues that we think we win on. But crime and the economy, I think, are good for Republicans. I mean, in general, people tend to trust us more. Maybe not in Portland, that's still to be said, but I think outside of that, we do get I think a couple of points, and then abortion. Of course, you can crowbar issues in. You say, well, the pollsters and John could talk about that, sure, but you can also crowbar an issue with enough money. I mean, if you want to make an issue something, all you got to do is throw a bunch of money at it, and now abortion is on the table, right? So, and I think the Democrats will definitely try to wedge that one in to the issue front. I hope not, but we'll see. Reagan, you got any thoughts on that or?
Well, I just asked Chat GPT if a former president of the United States has ever been defeated in an election and then run again and won. Grover Cleveland was defeated by Benjamin Harrison, but I don't think he ran again against Benjamin Harrison for a second term. So that's the difference between Trump and Biden. Usually the candidate lose, like Jimmy Carter didn't run again 4 years after Ronald Reagan beat him. So it's very rare. Most of these candidates go away. Trump seems to be the only one that stuck around, probably because he says the election was stolen from him. So, and as far as issues in the election, I think I don't know why, but 2022 seemed to be a bad or worse economy with the inflation, but it didn't seem to hit the same. And I think that abortion sort of pulled the rug out from under the economy. I think if you have this election on the economy, it is going to be better for Republicans. And there's a lot of indicators in the May primary that new funding measures got defeated. I mean, I was working on the Lebanon Fire District, and we got beat up pretty good. Bend had a funding for schools, which I thought in Bend Lopine would pass fine, and it got defeated. So there was a couple of indicators to me that voters were fine keeping stuff they're already paying for, but they're not going to pay for anymore, which tells me that they're sort of feeling a little bit economically strained, and that's not usually good for the incumbent president. So I think there would need to be basically like a new issue that developed that was more important than the economy, for that to change. And then, yeah, I mean, I think Biden's sort of playing both sides of the border issue. That doesn't usually work. It would be better for him if he honestly stuck to one side or the other. Um, I think if Biden pulled a Clinton and got really aggressive on being conservative on like one or two key issues, it would put him right back in the driver's seat. And either he or his team are just unwilling to do that, which I find to be very fascinating.
Yeah, we'll see. I think it's going to be a long summer. I think we got a debate coming up, which should be telling. I think that there's some salient issues. I don't think they're protruding issues, but I would say my prediction, and Dirk, I'll ask you for your prediction before we sign off. Because I know journalists like love to give your own editorial predictions, but and maybe mine will kind of give you a tell of where I think you should go. But I think the incumbents are going to be very difficult to beat. I think people when there's not driving issues, that it's hard to really force change. So sometimes people are like, oh yeah, that's our representative or that's our senator, um, or I know so and so. And I think that unless there's a critical issue that you're hitting on with a personal flaw or something that they did, I think we're going to see and sadly, at this point in time, I reserve the right to change my mind. But I think we're going to see a lot of the same numbers in the legislature and about the same results statewide is my thinking for Oregon.
Well, I think the Dems probably think they're gonna get that Bend seat that Senator Knopp is leaving. I know that you guys have high hopes on the Senator Gorsuch seat, and there's designs on the coast. I will tell you all this. I spoke with Brian Boquist yesterday, who predicts a 2010 Democratic majority in the Senate because he believes his seats will be going D. Take that as you will.
Well, I think
That's interesting.
I think anything that Brian Boquist doesn't do, he doesn't think anybody else can do better. So I think that's probably Senator Boquist's statement on that. But I like Senator Bruce Starr, and he'll be senator again. So,
That one's not going to be that hard,
however,
honestly. I think
he's
that's
probably right.
interesting.
Yeah, he's probably right in the changing demographics in Yamhill County. I think that's definitely, something to discuss. But there's a lot of Polk County in that district and stuff like that is not going to vote that way. So
And
interesting.
that seat, I think the way also you kind of look at registration. I mean, Senator Bonham's seat is a registered 0 seat, and he won it by 18 points. Registration isn't as useful of a metric anymore because in conservative seats, the Navs vote conservative. And you have to look at, I mean, that seat, the House District 23, the old, Nearman, currently Scharf seat, and that Senate seat, they're both built as Republican vote sink seats so that Democrats can win other seats. If more of their seats came into that rural territory, they'd all be competitive. There's a reason that seat isn't going to go blue. I mean, if you look at the map construction, the way they build these maps, they build out from Portland and they try to maximize the Democratic advantage in Portland, and they do the same in Eugene, and then they did the same in Bend by trying to, and they're trying to do the same thing in Southern Oregon. The problem with Southern Oregon, and the reason that it will eventually go Republican, but it's going to take a little longer, is there's nowhere else to go for Democratic votes. Ashland is the only Democratic stronghold. Everything around it's bright red. In Bend, you've got Bend and you've got Sisters, and that's basically it. But the population is big enough that it now supports one size Senate seat. And that seat, the reason that seat in Yamhill won't go blue is because as long as they construct the map the way it's built, they have to use that area as a vote sink. Even though more people from Portland are coming in, shifting the numbers a little bit, they'll just add more rural area to it to balance it out eventually. So it's an interesting thought, and I think like his concern is true because Yamhill's become a more competitive area. It's a bedroom community for rich Portlanders who are fleeing the deadly streets of Portland, as you pointed out, Dirk. It's a safe place for them to land. They don't like the current politics because it's very conservative. The Newburgh school board battle is clear, but like Newburgh itself is competitive. The rest of the area is just so red, like it's going to overwhelm it. And Dems won't. I don't think that they have the resources to spread the map that far. Could be wrong, but that's sort of my take on that area. But
Newburgh's like the DMZ of Yamhill County. It's crazy. The amount of political strife that comes out of that community is just intense. It's pretty crazy. I think you're interesting with your map. I think that's kind of because I think when they were working on Senator Anderson's, if you look at the coast, right? I mean, you can't go into the ocean. And then when you go into the foothills, all you do is get Republicans. So how do you shift it outside of Lincoln County where it's Democrat,
Yeah, and it's not my. I mean, I know that the Dems
I know
Anderson as a stretch goal, and I think that they really feel strong about Broadman in Bend.
Yeah. How could you not? Yeah, I mean, Bend has definitely gone bluer. There's no doubt. I mean, with Jason Krupp's seat and then Broadman is I would say a strong candidate on paper. Michael Summers is a pretty strong candidate too, but he's not Tim Knopp. And Tim Knopp, you got a 30-year veteran in there. It makes a difference. You can erase a lot of that voter registration stuff. It is definitely different, but I think the same thing with Gresham. I think I don't know where we end up with, but should be interesting. The House has got a few opportunities, but they got a few holds. Like we got to be on the attack all of 2022. It was, attack everywhere in all fronts, but now they got to defend some of the turf we picked up. So that changes their dynamic a little bit. New leadership all around always changes everything a little bit. So I'm curious to see what will happen.
Yeah, should be interesting. My one prediction is Biden takes Oregon. That's my one hard prediction.
Oh man, I don't know.
Well, I think we about did it, Reagan. What do you think?
All right. Well, thank you, Dirk, for joining us. It's been a pleasure. It's good to chat. This felt like when we chat in the hallways of the Capitol. Those are always Very fun, very informal. I posit things you find ridiculous or extreme, and you try to rein it back in. But anyway, we really appreciate you joining us. You can find Dirk on Twitter at DIRQUEZ, Dirkez on Twitter. It's Dirk VanderHart, OPB. You can also find all of his writing on opb.org. You can always follow Bryan at Bryan G. Iverson. There hasn't been, Bryan, an anti-public transportation tweet from you in a little bit, so get on it. You're
Busy,
really
Reagan.
not
I've been busy.
performing. I'm, of course, at Reagan Knope. You can follow Crosstabs at CrosstabsFM and visit crosstabs.studio. And don't forget to rate the podcast, especially on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. That helps us climb the charts, gets more people listening. And Dirk, you mentioned bringing on John Horvick on the podcast. I sent him a DM on Twitter while we were recording, and he said he is listening and would love to join. So appreciate you helping us out there, Dirk, getting more guests,
No
doing
problem.
the work.
No problem. It was great to be on. I enjoyed it, y'all.
Thanks, Dirk.